Hey everyone, this is the Love of Cinema podcast. We like to talk movies. If you like to talk movies too, you come to the right place.
See the success of Avara or Shri 420 in Moscow, and you try and trace it back to how and why that city and that country. Why not Turkey? Why not Afghanistan? Why not, you know, Germany for that matter? Why that country specifically? And when you start asking those questions, is when your research team really comes into play, and they found some really interesting documents which informed us that okay, we just scratched the surface, but what came from underneath that surface was actually floodgates of very interesting trivia opened up.
A couple of weeks ago, I tweeted out that there's a new show on Amazon Prime that feels special, that feels prestige right off the bat, from the very first episode. It's a familiar, though rare feeling, where a few minutes into a film or a show, you begin to have an inkling that this is going to be good, something that stands out from the rest. Yes, my tweet was alluding to Jubilee, the new period drama set in the 40s and 50s and centered around the aspiration and ambition of a group of people from the world of Hindi cinema. A show that's in ways more than one about the song and dance of Hindi cinema of that period. This is Himanshu, and you're listening to the Love of Cinema podcast. But before moving on, an important friendly reminder. If you enjoy organic conversations centered on Indian cinema, Love of Cinema podcast was created for people just like you. So if you find value in the podcast, if it helps you in discovering new films or new facets about familiar films, do consider supporting the show. Love of Cinema podcast is my passion project, and with every episode, I've attempted to create something that cinephiles will continue to find value, not just today, but over time as well, to create something that goes beyond banter, beyond trending films. So if you find value in the conversations on the podcast, please do consider supporting the show. Your support will help me continue creating content with shelf life for fans of Indian cinema like you everywhere across the planet. You'll find a link to support the show in the episode notes. You can also support the show directly from the podcast website. It's fast, it's easy, and your support is greatly appreciated. Independent pods like this one don't have a platform for amplification and distribution. Independent pods rely on amplification through its listeners. So if you like the episode, please share the episode on social media, as that will help other people discover the podcast. Back to today's episode. I got a chance to chat with writer Atul Sabharwal and director Vikramaditya Motwane about the writing, the process, and the craft behind Jubilee. Over an hour-long chat, we touched on everything from characterization, research, and casting, to the way the show was lit, the approach employed in presenting a specific era and the films from that era, the excellent music and production design, Vikram's briefs to the lead actors, and my favorite bit from the entire show, the closing 7 minutes of the final episode. I like the entire soundtrack and the way the songs have been used in the show, but they have done something very special with Sare Ke Sare Akele. I thought they really raised the bar with that song and the closing 7 minutes. That and all other things Jubilee. Here goes. First of all, first things first, let me start by thanking you both for bringing us this show. It's a lovely drama set against the backdrop of the aspiration and ambition of early decades of Hindi cinema. A show that's full of heart, that feels prestige through and through. And it's an absolute trip for people like me who are so fond of cinema. So totally dug it. Great show.
Thank you.
I wanted to start out, guys, by talking a little bit about the conception of the show and the creative decision of writing a story that blends fact and fiction, that draws inspiration from real people, but is essentially a work of fiction, versus something like Mank, biographical drama, centered around those real people from that era. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'll start it off and then I'll hand over to Atul Samparna. So I think what did happen was that when the idea of doing a series on this on something like this came up is actually literally maybe about 10 years ago when we were all discussing series. It was the conversations weren't movies anymore. It was about the latest season of GOT or Breaking Bad or Mad Men and that kind of stuff. So I think the idea was that what if we did a series based on the Indian film industry, behind the scenes, power people, power play, and then sort of like moving forward from there, and potentially go into multiple seasons or whatever. And I think one of the early discussions that we had was like, what should we base it on real people? And I think two things happened there. One is that you were like, this is going to be a legal nightmare. And number two, it almost felt that it kind of does a disservice in a sense overall to the whole gamut of people that have actually and the whole thing. So we very quickly figured that no, let's make it fictional. Let's use our love for cinema and urban legends that we know about and talk about and discuss about, and then use them as starting points, and then kind of go off in different directions. So it started off as a idea, it became like a pitch doc. It became a very rough kind of like pilot screenplay, which is when Atul came in, when I sent it to him to read and asked him if he'd like to, be involved. And yeah, over to you, Atul.
So I think by the time it came to me, those questions were already answered, that it is based on fictional people. And the challenge that and the excitement for me was, can we get into the mindset of those people, who were creating these movies and their ambition in the 50s, and what were the events that were impacting them, what was happening around them, and what were the emotions that they were going through. And I know there is no evidence to cross check that right now, whether we have hit the nail on the head or how accurate I have been with it. But that's the benchmark or sort of a yardstick I held for myself, that the goal here is to try and get into the mindset and see with what were the rules they were following and what were the rules they were breaking, so to say. And a lot of that information came from watching the films, with another lens altogether, as to if I could see a film, a Raj Kapoor film or a Guru Dutt film, and decode the decisions made from those films.
Got it. Got it. And I guess also when you're doing a work of fiction, it gives you that creative license to play around with the timeline, which I think you guys did a little bit. So it also buys you that. And that's also nicely done. One of the interesting things that Jubilee does is this meshing together of threads drawn from multiple real life people into one character. So Jay's mannerisms remind you of Devan, and his film is called Taxi Driver. But it starts a studio on land reserved for partition era migrants, a bit like Raj Kapoor's RK Studios in Chembur. How much of all this was deliberate meshing, so to speak, or was it mostly just subconscious characterization?
So I don't think Raj Kapoor started a studio on a land reserved for migrants. He bought a land because
Oh,
Raj
really? Okay.
Kapoor was a very big star's son and a very successful producer, director, and
Yes.
actor. Before he became director, he was a big star already, doing Kedar Sharma's films and Mehboob Khan's Andaz. So I think for me, if one really wants to nitpick and get to the bottom of it, what I did with Jay Khanna was the filmmaker part of it. The actor, of course, is a mashup of too many people. It was to uh, find the same trajectory what Bimal Roy could have perhaps gone through, again not documented, when he came to this side of the border with the partition of Bengal. There's a very nice short story in Gulzar's book. The book is called Ravi Par, and the short story is called Bimal Da. So Gulzar has a very interesting thing. It's in that book, it's autobiographical stories, but short stories. So it's not an autobiographical novel. And in that, he's describing the last days of Bimal Roy and his meetings with him. It's dying Bimal Roy. But it also touches upon how Bimal Roy came and what was his process. And there's another interview by Bimal Roy's daughter long ago, I've seen somewhere, I think on Doordarshan, where she explains that leaving home a moment of leaving home forever was always a key moment in her father's film because he always was troubled by the pain of the house that he had to leave behind due to partition. So whether you see O Jaane Wale Ho Sake To Laut Ke Aana in Bandini or Dharti Kahe Pukar Ke, Kaun Kahe So Tu Phir Aaya Na in Do Biga Zameen. So I think I brought Jay from there because I wanted to touch upon partition. And there is no a specific person who came in the 40s who was also a filmmaker, director, lived through the refugee camp. So it's a completely fictional arc, but sort of informed by the emotions that Bimal Roy dealt with in his films.
And speaking of Jay's family, his father is played by Arun Govil. Do tell us about that casting decision for a minute.
It's actually all thanks to my casting director Anmol from Casting Bay. We had been sort of like meeting a few people about casting the father because it was a interesting. He wanted somebody with a little bit of stature, a little bit of weight, a little bit of the patriarch in a sense. We weren't really getting anywhere with that kind of casting. Either it was getting to be very kind of bookish casting, but you weren't feeling a sense of humanism in the casting. And then Anmol said, "What about Arun Govil?" And I'm like, "Will he audition?" He's like, "Yeah, why not? Let's try it." And he actually did audition, and I thought it was very interesting. He wasn't the patriarch that was on the page, that one imagined. But I thought there was something very interesting about him, just generally his personality. And I think of course, there's a lot of baggage that the audience tends to carry when they see Arun Govil on screen. Automatically, you get a sense of benevolence coming through the screen automatically. And I think that works in his favor in the sense that he is the man who is peaceful. He is non-violent. He is all those things, and I think that automatically, once you get there, it just enhances his character and his personality. And it was, it was very, very interesting. He was the one actor, I think, from the whole bunch who had probably not acted in the longest time. And I think it was a lovely part for him to play, where he's kind of coming back into the world of acting and finding that the world has changed. But he was very gracious about it. He was amazing about it. He had a lovely phone call. He called me and sort of was very happy with the way things turned out. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one more thing. When I was watching the first time he appears on screen, and we see Jay's family for the first time, that time again, I'm thinking that this guy is Devanand, and since Chetan Adan was more like a father figure, I'm again thinking that this guy is Devanand, and Arun Govil is like that, elder brother kind of a father. So that also like nicely plays in with that meshing together. Vikram, I want to segue to the next question, which is about how some of the scenes were approached. But I think it's a good place to segue to that place. Is there is that lovely scene with Arun Govil where he's singing Chandu Nacha. That feels straight out of 50s movies. Something like Ichak Dana, Bichak Dana, or David's song from Boot Polish, Nanne Munne Bacche. And there's another scene towards the very end when Naren starts singing Sare Ke Sare. And we'll come back to that lovely scene. That's one of my favorite moments from the entire show. But staying on Chandu Nacha for a minute, when you're making something like Jubilee, a show about the showbiz in 40s and 50s, of course, quote unquote, there are going to be film portions which have to be shot in a certain way to make them appear in tune with that particular era. But besides those film portions, how do you go about deciding, which scenes you want to shoot in the style of that era? Because, of course, you don't want to shoot everything like that because that would be too tacky. You know what I mean?
No, I get that. I think and that was a very conscious decision in terms of shooting. Is the fact that we didn't want to, at any point in time, ape any style of shooting of an era. We were going to create our own style, essentially follow characters, mainly as your primary source of kind of like whatever emotion you're trying to feel is your character feels it first, and then therefore the camera kind of tends to feel it. So at no point, I think the only rule we had was no handheld shots, and there's literally one handheld shot in the entire series, which I always ask people. I'm like, guess which one it is. So yeah. And the day I told Pratik, I'm like, this is your one chance of a handheld shot. He got so excited. He started warming up and stuff. So so as I was saying, I think there was no fixed style. I didn't want to ape it. I wanted to keep it, you know, deliberate, because it's kind of the mood, and I think everything changes. So, for example, your song where your Mujra song in episode 1, and because it's Jay seeing Nilofer, he's immediately very smitten with her. There's a sense of him. He's going to, fall in love with her. You sense there's going to be some chemistry between the two of them. So there's a certain lyricism to the way that song is shot, because you wanted to feel like his mood is getting slightly elevated. So therefore, the shooting style of that song is slightly elevated. The use of close-ups and the movement around her as she's sort of like doing it is a very deliberate sort of like lyrical approach to that. But Chandu Nacha, because that scene is all about Jay's mood. He's come from a place where he's been in a low, he's met Nilofer in that rain, he's now in a high, and that scene is literally, it's that high has made him realize what an ass he's been about this whole thing. He should just do what he does best. And so the idea in Chandu Nacha is that this needs to be the least amount of movement possible. If anything, it needs to be almost wide shot, still on him as he's performing, where you're not being lyrical about the moment. You're letting him be front and center. You're letting him enjoy the moment and do his thing without moving the camera at all. So, I mean, I think these are just two examples of certain kind of things. But generally, our approach to the camera has been, let the character lead it. Let it be what we need the audience to feel in the moment, and that's just overall been the approach pretty much throughout the show.
It's a beautifully lit show. I was just wondering how you guys and Pratiksha, the DOP, went about deciding the look, the palette of the show. A huge portion of the show has that, kind of that filament kind of a glow in the background. I don't know what that palette is called, but that kind of look. How did you go about the look of the show?
It had to be, authentic. So no LED lights, very, very, very little white lighting. There's only a couple of places where because tube lights weren't really common, especially, I mean, refugee camp, so there's no way, so even in the offices, we're using filament light. In the refugee camp, there's a few bulbs, but it's mostly either candlelight or it's kerosene lamps. So there a lot of yellow light everywhere, because that is the tone of it. And a lot of it comes from also our production design part of it. In production design, where we're deciding, okay, costumes, we will be within this color palette. In the rooms and in the furniture and the decor, we'll be within a certain color palette. And what we did was we took literally, like, nowadays you see a lot of people when they look at a scene and they'll say, this is the color palette. We actually did a lot of that in every scene. We actually put together color palettes and put them together on a screen and say that, okay, what doesn't work? And through that, we actually realized that, okay, for the palette of this, for example, we don't want any shocking pinks or bright yellows or bright greens. None of what we call the Indian colors. What when you go to a tailor, in the first thing they say, "Aapko English color chahiye, Indian color chahiye." Indian color means bright pink, bright yellow, bright green. English color means pastel. So we weren't going pastels either, but the idea was that let's keep it richer, subdued, more saturated, and deeper. The one rule we had was no blues in the production design of it at all. Like, blue was a big no-no for us, especially that typical bright blue. It just did not fit with the palette because of that. So from a color perspective, there was that design element. From a lighting perspective, it was, again, whatever is natural. But I think what really worked for us is the new technology of cameras, actually. Honestly, right now, they are so amazingly sensitive that there used to be once upon a time, and even 10 years ago, you'd walk onto a set and the brightest part of a set is where they're shooting. It's the exact opposite right now. The darkest part of the set is where you shoot, because your cameras are so sensitive that you can literally have a single light bulb and it can actually light up, entire set. Like, you put too much light and the camera and the contrast levels go for a toss, and the cameras, they pick up kind of everything. And because we needed large spaces and large rooms, you wanted to keep it as natural as possible, keep the light as even as possible in certain places, and then the camera kind of like does a lot of the heavy lifting, for you, because you don't have to then overlight and create light to be able to sort of do that.
And Vikram, what kind of references do you go about for sharing with your DOP? Because the movies from those time are all black and white. So, what are you looking for as references for DOP and his unit to kind of study that kind of era? Are you looking at? Is it literature or what is it?
No, it's movies because we're talking about the cinema, so it's movies. So there will be a selection of movies that I would have Pratik in this case see, and in this case, I think Sri Charsobi's Avara, Mahal, these three for sure. I'm trying to think what else. I didn't make him watch any Ray because that was not the world that we were sort of like doing it. But I think essentially it was these three films in terms of like watch these and then we'll work with our black and white kind of palette from within this. So he was studying just essentially
I
how
see.
do you replicate. Of course, you can't go out and sort of say we want the arc lights to come here and actually sort of light it. You can't use those. So how do you replicate the same thing with modern lights and create that sense of harshness, understanding how sensitive these cameras are and stuff like that. So that was it. He kind of Pratik sort of like because he comes from a very sort of story that very like, okay, what's the source light stuff model? So yeah, when we had to shoot like a song, for example, I don't know if you've seen episode 8, but there's the whole the Infinity Staircase song, which is the tribute to Ghara Hai Mera Pardesi. I mean, Pratik
Right.
just like freaked out. He's like, what am I doing? What's the light source? I'm like, it's a dream sequence. It's a song. It doesn't matter. There's clouds in the sky and there's clouds on earth, and in the middle of clouds is an Infinity Staircase. So yeah, it took him a while to get used to the Bollywoodization or the Hindi film. It took some time for that.
A place where this show probably breaks new ground, so to speak. I feel is where it talks about how the Cold War dynamics and India's relations with Russia at that time played a significant part in shaping the films and certain stars of that era. A couple of years ago, I was reading Devanand's biography, Romancing with Life. And I remember him hinting in it that he personally was always, more aligned with Western Europe, with free capital markets, and he was always a Europhile, more than the socialist philosophy that Russia of that time subscribed to. And I always found that in stark contrast to the strong socialist underpinnings to many of Raj Kapoor's films.
Raj Kapoor's film.
And I'm glad that this show sheds some light on that space because that rarely gets touched on in movies, shows. Atul, what was the thinking behind that? And I know that you have a show that's in the work that maybe some of the research from there might have bled over. But could you talk about that a little bit, and then I'll have a follow-up. I also have a follow-up question.
I think there are two parts to it. One is that I'm quite a Russophile from childhood because in the city that I grew up in, there were these mobile near publisher vans that would sell cheap books, and they were recommended by our teachers. Books like Fun with Chemistry and Fun with Physics. I still may have some of the books. So my father used to take me to those bookstores, and if you've seen my documentary again, Russia is a huge impact at the local shoe trade in the hometown that I grew up in, and my father's business and the business of his colleagues got impacted by the whole collapse of the Soviet Union. So when you grew up like that, and when I started working on this show, or even because of my interest in history when I did with Powder or recently with another show, or even the film that I've just finished, Berlin, those elements tend to creep in. But what happened on specifically on Jubilee was that when you see the success of Avara or Shri 420 in Moscow, and you try and trace it back to how and why that city in that country, why not Turkey, why not Afghanistan, why not, you know, Germany for that matter, why that country specifically? And when you start asking those questions, is when your research team really comes into play and they find they found some really interesting documents which informed us that okay, we just scratched the surface, but what came from underneath that surface was actually floodgates of very interesting trivia opened up. Telegrams being exchanged between CIA officials as to which film should play at Moscow Film Festival, or with what ideology Indian diplomats are sending certain movies to the Moscow Film Festival, why a certain Devanand film called Rahi should be banned because it speaks about an uprising among the tea plantation workers in Assam, and how those are. So I think also it sort of falls in for Hindi film industry. It sort of falls in parallel with the McCarthyism which is happening in Hollywood at that time. So a lot of that started asking the questions as to where were our films being watched internationally, and why were they reaching those specific places, and what was the quid pro quo involved, that if those films are going there and finding a showcase, what were we gaining or losing in return? And then once things started falling in place, these storylines emerged from that, which is factual based and all that.
By the way, that bit about American hand behind Radio Ceylon phenomenon, how close to reality was that? I asked that because Radio Ceylon is such a huge part of Hindi film folklore.
So there is an article, I think it's in an older issue of Variety or something, that Americans have bought a specific radio station in Sri Lanka, in Ceylon at that point. And when I found that article, I don't know whether I have it. It's a newspaper clipping. I gave it to the research team and said, "Can you dig more on this? Is it the same place where, what was the name of the program?
Radio
Binaka
Ceylon.
Geetmala used to be
Oh, Binaka
aired
Geetmala,
from."
yes.
And they came back with the fact that yes, it was. So it was just two separate pieces of evidence colliding into each other and sort of matching like that torn note in Diwar.
Very interesting, yes. Snowdrop, the name of the room where Binod meets Jotwani and the Russians is Snowdrop.
There's no there's no Easter egg though.
Okay.
Happened to be the name of the room in the hotel we were shooting in.
Okay.
So there's a literally moment of like where some of those things are like that. There's a moment where it's almost like production saying that, do you want us to change the name of the hotel room to a number? And I'm just like, no, Snowdrop is fine.
Okay.
This seems kind of correct.
Okay. The reason I asked, because again, this all seems, way too uncanny for me, because since I know that Atul has been working on this film called Berlin, which is, I think, in the world of espionage and spies. And Snowdrop is essentially, code for a dead body that turns up when the snow melts. And, I thought that this is some kind of a foreshadowing for the quote unquote dead body that's going to turn up soon, or even more. And maybe I'm reading too much into
it doesn't snow in Bombay, just in case you didn't know. With climate change, what will happen, we don't know. But yeah, it doesn't snow in Bombay.
And metaphorically, I thought, maybe this is foreshadowing of Binod's Madan Kumar, not Binod himself, but the star Madan Kumar, too kind of turning up dead, so to speak, eventually. So I'm reading too much into Snowdrop.
I'll use
Next time, change the name.
That's the takeaway, right?
That's the takeaway.
Yeah. By the way, Atul, मुर्दों का कोई मजहब नहीं होता, ये मुसीबत तो हम जिंदा लोगों की है. That, my friend, is straight up Kadir Khan level. I really love that line. Yes, slow cap for Atul Sabharwal. By the way, I also loved it when Walia brags to Vamika, "Ju mein farmhouse." Both my wife and I burst out laughing at that line, because it's such a throwaway line. Yeah, but damn, I mean, if you have a farmhouse in Jew, you must have made it. But great stuff. Great lines.
Thank you.
Vikram, coming back to the production design, production design is just great. I mean, I absolutely loved the Roy Talkies lot. I always wondered, when we would get to see on screen a vintage studio lot like that of Prabhat Talkies or Bombay Talkies. And finally, we got to see one that's really nicely done. Love the cars too. And this might again sound sort of random, but I got to ask you, are you a big fan of In a Lonely Place, Bogart's Nicholas Ray picture?
No, not really. Why do you
Okay.
ask?
Okay, here's the reason why I ask. The car scenes from Lootera, always reminded me of the scenes from In a Lonely Place with Bogart and Graham in the 1949 Mercury convertible. And I read somewhere that the car from Lootera was also of 1949 vintage. Is that accurate?
It was it was a 49
Chevy, I think. Yeah.
Chevy.
Right.
Chevy.
And are the cars from Jubilee also of 1949 vintage?
They are. I mean, where it's 47, they're 47, they're pre-47. That way, my team was
Okay.
very, very specific about the fact that, in fact, I mean, some of the research, and this is the AD team, they went so deep into some of the actual dates of so there's a big chart they've got where every scene has a date. And we try to keep it as authentic as possible. And of course, a joke would be, December mein barish. So even though the audience has no clue and about that kind of concept, but they were very, very strict about that. So, and it literally, it came down when I could actually ask them, okay, what day is this being shot? And they would say, okay, this scene is in, July 1951. And we'd be like, okay, 51 mein, yeah. Just helps you. So yes, the cars are very, very authentic to the period that they are being shot in. They're all, unfortunately we had to rent all our cars. Other than the car, of course, that we turned turtle. That one we had to buy. Yeah, I mean it's amazing. There's these little hidden places in Bombay where you go and you don't even realize it. And there's a place in Parel right next to the animal hospital where there is a garage. There's actually a municipality garage, which is there for parking, and you sort of enter it, and then you go one level down. It actually feels like you're entering the basement, and then you've got this one garage full of these beautiful vintage cars, all the way from the 30s, up to 60s and 70s, like fantastic stuff. Man.
Yeah, I love the car. I think this is my guess from what I gathered from the frame. I think the one that Jay is driving is a Chrysler. I might be wrong, but I thought that was a Chrysler. Yeah, beautiful cars.
Chrysler, and Binod's is a DeSoto.
Also loved Roy's office and the lobby, especially in Roy's office. Very Mad Men like. The cushions and the stuff. Mad Men was that a reference? Because even with the show, and we'll talk about this later, I thought that there are many similarities in the way that the show deals with a certain era. But in terms of production design, because this is obviously a decade probably before the 60s.
It's a decade before. So no, Mad Men wasn't. Mad Men was an inspiration for the fact that, damn it, we can make a show about this in the first place. I think no one would have looked at Mad Men and saying a show about a bunch of, one of the greatest modern day shows is a show about a bunch of boozy advertising executives in New York in the 60s. Is like, what? I mean, what kind of pitch is that? But I mean, it's a similar kind of thing, I think, in that. So yeah, as an inspiration as to, oh, they've done it, therefore we can do it. I mean, I love Mad Men, and I love Don Draper, and I love all those characters actually. But no, I think it's a visual reference. And generally, I think, me personally, I like to stay away from too much referencing, because I think that you tend to get too kind of caught up in a certain sort of thing. So most of the references that we do is just, although those are like those deep memory references, I think there's a tendency to refer to something that you've seen maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that stayed with you, and not so much something that you've kind of seen specifically for a purpose.
I see. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I found a lot of nodding and hat tips to the classics. And again, like you said, it probably is, something that it's done subconsciously, because the dialogue itself, winks and nods with many references to 50s classics like Bazi and Shri 400 Base. Yeah. So all that kind of stuff, and the lovely music of the show, packs several hat tips, I thought, from S.D. Burman's Takdeer Se Bikdi Hui Takdeer to Shankar Jaikishan's, classic, those accordion riffs, to straight up now to Hridayanathan Mangeshkar's Dolkar Darya Sa Raja, one of my favorite songs. All nicely done. But my absolute favorite is the last song of the show, Sare Ke Sare Akele. And I want to talk about the song in conjunction with those last 7 minutes or so of the finale, when the song appears in the show. It's gorgeous stuff. But before we move ahead, I just want to insert a spoiler alert here for the listeners. If you haven't watched the final episode of the show, I would strongly urge you to first watch the finale of the show and then continue listening from here on. So again, if you're in the middle of the show, I would highly recommend completing the show before listening to the remaining portion of this podcast. So you can always come back and listen to it. And I think it's one of the most beautiful moments of the show, the last few minutes. So, Vikram, coming back to Sare Ke Sare Akele, and again, a scene that feels very meta, right out of the movies of that era. The way it starts with a hungry, distraught Naren at the railway station skywalk. And then he breaks into this beautiful song that I again saw as a combined nod to two Guru Dutt classics, a song that nods to the tragedy of Bichde Sabhi Bari Bari from Kagaz Ke Phool, as well as the melancholy of Ye Duniya Agar Mil Bhi Jaye from Pyasa. I mean, the line itself, Dekho Ye Duniya Ke Mele, feels straight out of, Ye Duniya Agar Mil Bhi Jaye. And then the song segues to Bichde Sabhi Bari Bari territory with the line Sare Ke Sare Akele. Just lovely stuff, guys. All of you, Amit Trivedi, Kosar, Devendra Pal, the entire team. And the visuals are equally dope. We start with that back shot of Binod and his wife vacating their house, followed by Nilofer reading of Sumitra's death in the train. And then there's this lovely cut between, Sumitra Devi kind of touching up in front of the vanity mirror, and then she looks straight into the mirror, and then back to Nilofer in the train. There's that montage of the film portions at the end. What can you guys share with us about making those gorgeous final 7 minutes of Jubilee, and how difficult was it cracking the ending?
I mean, you're right in saying that. I think Dekhi Zamani Ki Yari was the sort of reference point musically for me, even though it's not quite the same. I think Dekhi Zamani Ki Yari is the beginning of Kagaz Ke Phool. This is the end of Jubilee. There is that. I just think from a mood piece, that was always something that was literally in the back of my mind. And Kausal and me spoke about it, and sort of said, I said, look. So if anything, that was the most obvious thing. I said, I want my Dekhi Zamane Ki Yari. You write it for me. So I think she almost approached it in that sort of way. And in fact, when I didn't have the when I had the song, but we'd already started shooting some of the end bits, I was using Dekhi Zamani Ki Yari as a kind of like reference to see if the mood was fitting or not. Like is this all great? So yeah, it is a lament and a celebration at the same time. I think there is that. It starts with lament and it ends in a celebration. That comes through. And yeah, I mean that the dovetailing and all that is all Atul's. I mean that's the magic of writing, right? It's like when you have setup, and then payoff. Which is always just 10 episodes worth of setup that kind of pays off in 7 minutes at the end of it. So
Writing wise, I think because I was watching a lot of older films of that point, and I think one of the songs that I really like visually is when this guy in Rashtri's Dosti, he's walking through the lanes of Bombay looking for his friend. And there are, of course, plenty moments where a hungry person starts singing. So I think the song that was in my head was Surna Saje Kya Gaon Mein, because he wants to be a singer, and he breaks down, and that's the only way he can express, and people will think he's a beggar because he's broken into a song, and they start dropping coins at his feet. And so I just wrote a moment like that a moment in which somebody would sing Surna Saje Kya Gaon Mein, or मेरा तो जो भी कदम है वो तेरी राह में है from Dosti. And when those pages reached Vikram, I think he had the reference of the Guru Dutt song and how to interpret it visually, and he then turned it into this. I think there was another song which was made before this, and I think Vikram put it on the edit also, and then checked whether that was working or not. And I think, did you do one edit before you shot the vocals in Sri Lanka with Dekhi Zamani Ki Yari also? I think so. Vikram also toyed with it a bit because the montage was shot before.
Oh, nice.
Naren's
Okay.
portion of was shot.
Because we were shooting it through a period of time, right? I was just like, I knew that I wanted, for example, the goodbye to the studio was going to be all those shots of Roy Talkies as you're sort of like moving away. So that was a deliberate plan. How the music was going to be, I had no idea. So every set we went to, the last thing we shot, I made sure was like just make sure we get one shot that we're moving back and leaving the place. The other scenes was a bit of okay. We like sense I know what the mood is when Nilofar's sitting in the train or when Vinod's walking out of the house. Vinod's walking out of the house is actually a pretty direct reference to him leaving the first time when he's Madan Kumar, and now when he's leaving, the house still says Madan Kumar, but clearly he's not. So those things were there. Amit had composed another song. It's a beautiful song, but it almost that was too much of a lament, and I just felt that there has to be a slight celebratory kind of tone to this, especially for the ending.
For the montage
For the
bit,
last,
right.
for the last, yeah, for the
Yeah,
last 1 minute, I thought that was
Right. I also dug the tragedy of Jubilee, and I think this is where, again, maybe parallels are being drawn with Madman. Although Jubilee is a celebration of the aspiration and ambition of that era, its tragic culmination, if I may, is also true to the dark, unyielding side of the business in that era. And the very last scene nicely bookends the show, I thought, when we see the film can of Jamshed Khan's screen test being tossed in the truck alongside other property of Roy Talkies. There is an ashes to ashes, dust to dust vibe to that. And like I said, I love that ending. But was there a temptation to end on a slightly hopeful note?
Atul.
So this is something I love, and not just in Jubilee. I always try and bookend the beginning and ending of what I am doing. Um like even Aurangzeb had an alternate building where Prithvi is driving this car and it comes back in the end. And I think it's essentially
I remember you
my,
mentioning that when we
yeah,
did the
so
first
it's my
episode.
memory of, I think, Diwar, that it starts with, Shashi Kapoor receiving this award, and the whole film, you will travel, you'll do this magnificent journey. And so just that idea that a whole film has happened before the film has even begun, before you've taken your seat in the theater, these people have lived a life. Sholay, train coming into the station, last shot of the film, train leaving the station with Dharmender and Hema Malini. So when I was writing the pilot, I began the pilot for some reason with a shot of Madan Kumar's audition can being spooled into a projector and being threaded through it. It just organically came that, when I was writing the last episode, I said, is there a way I can find to end on that shot? And it just so happened that that one last piece of prop, the can, because that was the only thing that he didn't burn in the incinerator. He was just burning up the rejected people, and that can itself, the audition has been such a emotionally relevant prop in the film that you keep seeing it in several episodes, not just that. So it just organically came to that we bookended. So whenever I find or land up subconsciously on a moment that bookends something that we did previously, it it just makes me personally very happy, and so it's a bit of like how songs are structured. Like I remember there was one interview of Ismail Darbar where he said that Sanjay Bansali always used to taunt him that within your melodies to left right center bahut jata hai, and he says पर मैं वापस तो आता हूँ ना. So I think that's what gives me a very personal joy, whether most of it then later on remains in the edit or not, or is done differently is a separate thing. But yeah, even like lines like when Roy says, I'm just a businessman, and then when Sumitra sort of screws up a deal for him and she says, Sirf business kiya hai, so those repartees and all that. So that can, coming back to that can was one of those things, but it sort of tends to become poetic in the way Vikram has treated the whole sequence with the song and how those props are being thrown. So once a director takes it to a visual height, I think those moments, become a better payoff emotionally also, rather than just good writing.
And did you guys
To,
toy
to your question about, so now this is going to come into your question about the not so emo ending. I think Atul, there was another scene that it was Nilofer on the train coming back. She stopped at a station. There's whistles blowing. Somebody breaks into her compartment and goes and hides. And she finds that it's Naren. And Naren's hiding, saying, "I don't want to be a singer, and I don't want to be an actor. I just want to be a singer, and I'm running away from home. I've run away from home." And she's like, "Naren, this train's actually heading back to Bombay." And the two of them start laughing. Which we shot that, and I placed it in the edit, and I kept feeling that it's a bit of an anticlimax after the symphony of the ending. And I think that symphonic nature of the ending comes from just my affinity for kind of like Western classical in that sort of sense. It's like once you've done with the symphony, you're kind of like done with the symphony. It's almost like there's no point having another few notes after that. It's like there's an ending and there's an ending. So I think I was a bit stubborn about that. That no, yeah, this is it. Once you've gone to that Roy Talkie shot and gone up, what else is there to see in this story? What else is kind of like is there? So yes, it is a bit of a downer, but that's okay.
Finally, we got to talk about casting of the lead. Well, my first question was that for this kind of show, do you think the look tests carry an additional weight than usual because you're somewhere looking at hinting, towards real life folks through the actors? That, and if you could share how you narrowed on Apar Shakti, Vamika, and Siddharth. By the way, all of them are just superb.
I think the look tests are not so much about defining a look that's based on somebody. I think the look test that we wanted to do is to make sure that each character can, because you're seeing them in kind of like varying stages of their life. You're seeing Binod go from the lab boy with his chatta hair and his thin mustache to being launched in this film to becoming a movie star and then becoming a refined movie star till when he decides to try and ape Shrikant Roy with his cravats and stuff. So there's a definite arc. And that's just the clothes. And there's also the hair, there's also the makeup, there's also the look. The same with Jai Khanna. You're seeing him go from happy-go-lucky kind of like, cultured son of a cultured man to a refugee, to getting out, to working in Roy Talkies, acting in his movies, becoming a star, becoming an arrogant star with his own kind of like style, which is not Binod style. And so a look test sort of like just help you define character for this. It's not really about copying and that kind of stuff. And if there's that was always something like not really want to look at references to sort of like do that. And the same with Vamika. So yeah, we did extensive screen tests with all our extensive like kind of look tests and costume tests with all of them. I think they were all tired of just keep wearing different clothes and stuff. Casting, interestingly enough, Apar, again, my casting director, full credit to Anmol and the people at Casting Bay for just being able to find these people, audition them. We had a very, very long casting process, which I think was probably the first thing we said. The moment we're like, okay, we're getting into pre-production, and the first thing we're like, okay, let's just start casting. Let's send out script, let's send out pages. We need to find all these actors. Apar was, again, I'd known him as an actor. I'd seen his work in Dangal. I would never have made a connection of saying Apar Shakti as as Binod. But my casting director sort of sent me his audition, just on a tape, and I thought I was very impressed with it. I thought it was really, really good. So yeah, that's how he happened. The same with Udaan, the same with Vamika. Like all the just found them on casting, thought they were interesting, met them. Vamika was a bit of hit and miss. I almost didn't cast her, and then I did kind of like the first time we were supposed to do it. Then COVID happened, then I relooked my decision based on her Instagram feed, which I thought was quite funny. That's why I kind of like rethought it and then called her and brought her back. Yeah, I mean everybody other than as I said, other than Ram Kapoor, Prasenjit, and Aditi, everybody was auditioned, and including Arun Govil actually.
Especially loved Apar Shakti. In my opinion, this is like a breakout performance. And the bit that I really loved about his performance is that he brings in a silent, quiet edge with the thing that he does, like with a dead face, which you don't know what he's thinking. It could be that it might have a dark shade to it, a gray shade to it, or something. And then there's also this, where he's kind of styled and he looks like Dilip Kumar. And so, that's also great. But yeah, I really thought Apar Shakti did a lot of things with this character. Did you guys work on that? What was your brief to Apar Shakti for Binod and Madan Kumar?
I think with him playing Madan was very easy for him. I think that was the easier part for him to kind of like do. I think Apa naturally being the youngest son of a fairly well-to-do Punjabi family, that's not into. I think automatically there's a sense of like he has he doesn't take insults very well. Automatically, there is an you can almost sense the hair at the back of his neck rising when. So I think arrogance, and I say it in the nicest way. I think arrogance comes very naturally to him in the nicest way. I mean, he's the loveliest guy. But there is that. There's moments where the haughtiness of Madan Kumar in a natural way came very very easily to him. Binod's a little tougher because it's not natural for him. So I think I had to handhold him through some of the Binod process just to be. And I think a lot of the look and stuff does some of the work for that. But the thing is he's a phenomenally talented actor just naturally. So you are kind of like knowing that once you give him the space, that magic will happen. It may not happen in the first take or the second take, but it will happen at some point. And I think he's also figuring out his own method. He's figuring out his own energies. And I think, and for what he's done here is phenomenal. I think, given the same trajectory, I think he'll be quite special now.
Finally, what are the chances of part 3?
Next Friday.
Excellent answer.
Next Friday, Atul and me are meeting to discuss part 3.
Yeah.
That's kind of like, yeah, literally.
Part 3 and 4.
Part 3 and 4. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Well, great show again, guys. Really enjoyed this show. And I'm so glad that it's picking up. Because I really feel this is like a great prestige show out of India. And since it's on movies, I love it, even more so. So great show. Really enjoyed it. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast and chatting with me about this beautiful show.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. If you liked the episode, do consider supporting the show. Your support will help me continue creating content. You can find the link for supporting the show in the episode notes and on the podcast website. Also, do share this episode on Twitter, Insta, or Facebook. And do subscribe, rate, and review the pod wherever you listen to your pods. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at loveofcinemasf8. Feel free to reach out there or by email with your comments, feedback, and suggestions. You can find my email in the episode notes. That's the episode. This is Himanshu signing off. And as always, thank you for listening to the Love of Cinema podcast.